pleased and honored to have received the Leica Hall of Fame award this year. Throughout my entire career, when the occasional award arrived, I noticed that it releases tremendous creative energy in me. It encourages me to try harder, push further, and make greater efforts. And that happens to suit my state of mind at this period in my life. So, and to my previous colleagues who have won it, I render them homage, and I'm pleased to be included among them.
Let's start with the experiences of childhood acting going into the Navy, essentially.
I was born in Los Angeles, and my father worked at Warner Brothers during the 40s and 50s, and occasionally I would visit him on the set, and sometimes when they needed a child extra or bit player, they would call my school, my parochial school, and I would get on my bicycle and ride down Moore Park to Warner Brothers, and the cop would show me where they were shooting, and I would be on the set. And the first thing I noticed was, in those days, they were using orthochromatic film, which was blue sensitive, and it needed tremendous amounts of light. And these carbon arc lamps on the catwalks above the set, blasting light down there. And I liked that look, and surely it was to inform my later work. It was a very glamorous childhood until it wasn't, and I was thrown out of the house at 16 and went into the Navy the morning I turned 17, where quite by chance, they sent me to photography school. Now, it's important to note that I had dropped out of high school in the 9th grade. My parents divorced, so I felt responsible for that as a child. And then I'm failing out of photography school again, so I wrote the captain a letter and he let me back in to photography school. And I took it very seriously. And I recall vividly crossing the North Atlantic in this horrible storm. I was standing watching the fantail at 3 in the morning, and there was hail and thunder and lightning and sleet and rain. And I look up at the heavens and said, I'm going to be a photographer. Well, there must have been a lucky star on the other side of that storm looking down on me, because at that moment, I had my vocation. And I never looked back. I never doubted. It never wavered. It got me through thick and thin, and you could probably argue that I'm still staring and barking at the sky. But I know what it's like to have one's destiny set at an early age. It's a gift of enormous proportion. I was in the Navy on my ship for 3 years, and I lived in the dark room. I slept on an air mattress on the deck, and all I did was photography. That's all I did. And I became technically very advanced. Zone system, developing E1, ectochrome. I could do pretty much anything, aerial, industrial, portraiture. So I came out of the Navy a few months before I turned 21 and immediately went to the San Francisco Art Institute. And my instructors noticed that I was probably better than they were technically. Now, I stress that word technically because in those days, technique was all you really knew about photography. The films were slow, the lenses were slow, the materials were indifferent. It was hard to be a photographer. It was hard to master the darkroom. I stayed in school for a while. It was during the documentary period. By the way, the Americans had just appeared and we were all completely under the influence of it, galvanized by the content and the lack of technique that it seemed to display on the surface. So one afternoon, Dorothy Lang called the Art Institute and asked my instructor, Paul Hassel, if he could recommend somebody to be her assistant, and I got the job, and I became her darkroom man for a couple of years and worked with her a lot. And I learned things from Dorothea that continue to influence me to this day. While I was still in school, I got my first Leica, an M2, and I took that picture of the Chinese fellow behind the umbrella, And I was photographing in that mode on the street, Market Street to be precise, trying to do a kind of documentary, gritty, truthful looking, honest photograph. And one day, Dorothy invited me to show her my work. I'd worked for her for a year before she saw any of my pictures. And she said, "I see your problem, Raphael. You have no point of departure." And I said, "That's true, Dorothea. What is a point of departure?" She said, "Well, if you're going down to the drugstore to buy toothpaste and you encounter a significant event, because you're directed and motivated, you'll probably take a better picture." So I didn't really know what she meant, and I went back to the street and drifted around for another 7, 8 years. And it was only later, when I was working on The Somnambulist, where every picture I was now looking at is that part of my dream, I began to understand how important a point of departure is for a photographer. And since that day, since late, maybe 1969, about the time I was finishing up The Somnambulist, since that time I have always had a point of departure. I don't touch my Leica without a reason for making the photograph and placing it into the context of a bigger whole. When we think about the Leica M2, it spawned a generation, my generation, of photographers who began to realize that what you were seeing outside of the frame was going to massively influence what you're going to leave inside the frame. And I believe that my relationship to the instrument, which I'm happy to call now the Leica aesthetic, formed my vision as I was learning how to use it. I realized early on that that camera was capable of doing anything I was capable of asking of it. I decided in my 21st year that I was not going to experiment with other cameras. I had done everything in the Navy. I knew lots of different cameras. But I was looking for a kind of satisfaction. The key word. I thought I was going to find it as a documentary photographer, as a journalist. And after moving down to Los Angeles from San Francisco for a couple of years and failing, I moved to New York, where I was immediately well received and was presented to Magnum and worked out of the office for a few months. So I did experience some success in New York as a photojournalist, but it wasn't satisfying me. I started assisting Robert Frank. I had met him at Max's Kansas City one night, and Robert invited me to assist him on his films, Me and My Brother, Conversations in Vermont. And I learned from him the importance of being original. So all the while I'm dissatisfied as a photojournalist, I'm learning from Robert that you have to do something unique. And my work started changing anyway. I was doing very surreal photographs, the hand through the doorway, things like that, the hands over the boat. And I was moving into a direction that I didn't understand, which was later to become my direction. And when The Somnambulist finally came out 3 years later, Gene Thornton in the New York Times said, "Gibson appears to have arrived fully formed with no influences." Well, that really was music to my ears, because it meant that all my influences had successfully been torn away by the roots. I was now working on my own for myself, looking for a kind of autonomy that you never get while you're attempting to imitate somebody you admire. Why would one do that? By 1970, 69, whatever, I knew that my destiny was not to be a professional commercial photographer. I didn't want somebody telling me what to shoot and then subsequently determining whether or not it was a good photograph. So you see, with that attitude, you're not cut out to have a great career as a commercial guy. So I agreed to myself that I was going to make a living from doing my own work. Now, The Somnambulist came out. By 1970, I owed the Chelsea Hotel 9 months rent. I had 2 of my 3 Leicas and lenses in pawn, but the phone started ringing. You get little grants, little lectures, little workshops. I was able to start working on my second book, Deja Vu. I was having exhibitions, and I, to this day, live from the sale of my prints in shows, in galleries and such. But they're 2 distinctly different animals. I could easily define the difference, which is that when you're having an exhibition in a gallery or a museum, gallery. It's a public space, and public protocols are in effect, what we now call social distancing. You look at the work, you don't touch it, you don't get too close to it, you realize that there's other people around you. Whereas when you look at a book, you're on your own turf, you have it in your hands. Everybody looks at a book from the same distance, more or less, nearsighted, farsighted. I control the scale of the viewing distance. This is huge. This is an aspect. It's a decisive component of what I call the editorial autonomy that a photographer has when he or she makes their own book. It's you and it. Nobody's telling you what to do. You're doing it. To this day, I want all the credit, all the blame for what I do. I've always, as mentioned previously, had a point of departure. And around 1975, I had taken a picture of architectural detail in Arles at high noon, 12 o'clock. And it was when Van Gogh went crazy from the hot sun of the south of France. So I said, I'm going to do a homage. And I did that picture, and I noticed I was a 1 meter distance to the detail. And I liked the photograph because it had a strong negative shape on the left. It was very cleaned out, super minimal. So I decided to do a series where I was going to make my point of departure. All the photographs were to be made at 1 meter distance to the camera. That was the near point focus of the 50 millimeter Summicron. Plus I had a device, a dual range, would get me a few inches closer. So I never knew what the next picture was going to be, but I knew where to look. And it turned out to be the work that I exhibited in my debut New York exhibition at the Leo Castelli Gallery on 77th Street. So we have to remember that I started developing film around 1957, and all of a sudden I'm pushing 75. It's around 2012. That's a lot of time in the darkroom, and I had firmly convinced myself that the history of photography had been etched into the emulsion of black and white film, and it was an organic component. I loved feeling the light pass through my lens and warming the emulsion of the film. I loved imagining the developer softening the gelatin. You know, a painter or a sculptor has a relationship to their materials, and sculptor follows the grain of the wood or the marble. And so I didn't want to turn digital, but I was slowing down. I was tired of the darkroom. It was too slow for me. I had thousands of prints in my studio. I was still interested in the book. I still liked shooting. And then Leica approached me to put my name to endorse the first monochrome. I said, no, thank you. I couldn't possibly. And the guy said, well, Duncan Meter. He said, well, let us send you the prototype. I said, okay. So I just returned from Australia, and there's this FedEx box in my studio, and I open it up. There's this digital camera, which, you know, I charged the battery, and I went off to see my shrink, and I said to her, you know, I've got this camera. I don't think I can do anything with it. There's too much at stake. I can't change my look now. Digital has that surgical look. And so I'm leaving her office, and I have a 50 millimeter lens on the camera, and I'm taking a picture of the manhole in West Village. A bicycle comes through the frame, and I release the shutter instantly. And then I look at the display on the back of the camera, and I said, wow, that looks like it could have been taken by me. Well, I have to say that since that morning, I have not loaded a roll of film in any of my older cameras. I am completely digital. There is a difference. I can describe the moon to you in French. I can describe it to you in English. Same moon, different language. Slightly different meaning too. I'm interested in the semiotic, the digital semiotic. I want to continue to explore and learn the grammar of digital, and I'm very happy to do that. And so I'm almost 10 years now in the digital space, and it suits me immensely at this phase of my life to be able to produce quickly. When I produced Sacred Land, the whole project was shot in 3 weeks, and I have never been able to produce that much work with that quality in that short a time, and it's purely because of working in digital. And I had the results every night, every day. It informed what I was going to do subsequently the next day, and it's everything I want now. So we're back to where we originally started when I had my first Leica. This camera is capable of doing anything I'm capable of asking it to do. One of the reasons I was so excited by seeing that bicycle on the manhole covers in the display was because that picture reflected my vision in terms of how I want it to be conformed. I have a rigid infrastructure to how I architect my images. My compositions have to essentially be as tight as the surface of a drum. I know what I'm looking for. I want every part of the picture area to be completely seen and understood and function and deliver content. We see this in the work of any artist that we admire. They have what we'll call a visual signature, and it's something that sets them aside. And I've always wanted my photographs to look a certain way. I want to continually explore new subject matter. I don't want to do 1,000 pictures of the nude. I don't want to do 1,000 pictures of monuments. I don't want to do repetitions whatsoever, protracted typographies. That's not my thing. But I do want my work to reflect my intentions and my vision. I'm at a phase in life where people often ask me, do you spend a lot of time looking back? Is there anything you would have done differently, et cetera, et cetera? Uh, in my unauthorized autobiography, Self-Exposure, I wrote that my life has basically been divided into 6 major decisions. The first was to be a photographer. That was when I was in the Navy. The second was to commit exclusively to the Leica, which I did when I was 21. The next was to eschew commercial photography, which I did by the time I was 30. Then I met my beautiful wife, Mary Jane. I committed to her. And then in my 50s, I quit drinking, which was really kept me strong and able to continue to work. And then probably the latest important decision that I made was to go digital. Quite often in my seminars, people ask me, what's your favorite photograph? And I say, oh, my next one for sure. I believe as photographers, that's how we are positioned. You don't sit back on your laurels. It's not the nature of the medium. To this end, if we're all only as good as our next photographs, we're all in the same boat. But I've been in it longer than most.